We are live here with SCI TV. I'm Joshua Gordon, the founder of the Sports Conflict Institute. I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Ken Pendleton, and our guest, John Galas. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So, John, you're new to our audience, so we're hoping you could give an introduction of yourself, and then Ken will launch us into what I think is going to be a fascinating topic for the day around soccer and some subtopics as well.
Well, my name is John Galas. I am the head coach and sporting director for Lane United Football Club, which is a minor league soccer club based in Eugene, Oregon. And for those that aren't terribly familiar with the hierarchy of soccer in the U.S., we operate in the USL League and the Premier Development League, aka PDL, and which is pretty much the equivalent of minor league, say, short season rookie ball. Probably the fourth tier of soccer in the U.S., and we are considered a semi-professional club. Beyond that, I've spent time with the Portland Timbers, both as an assistant coach and as a performance analyst last year, including an assistant coaching role with the Portland Thorns, the women's professional team in Portland, which was the first NWSL champion in the newly founded Women's Professional League last year, and the first national championship, professional national championship in the state of Oregon since 1977. So that's something I'm very, very proud of, and I like to brag about that one quite a bit. Beyond that, I've spent about 10 years coaching at the NCAA level in the women's collegiate soccer game. I've spent years coaching in youth soccer in this country, and I've got a bit of experience overseas at the University of Liverpool, where I received my MBA in the football industries in 1999, as well as working in the Liverpool FC Youth Academy from 98 to 99. Beyond that, I've obtained all my U.S. soccer coaching credentials, as well as my NSCAA Premier Diploma this past year. So glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
John, you have so many different areas of background, but let's start with what you're currently doing with Lane United. And I think, from my point of view, as someone who grew up with American sports at a point where soccer was completely marginalized, the idea that there could be a fourth tier of soccer in and of itself is surprising, but what's really surprising is the idea that you're doing it as a business, right? That there's economic viability to this, and you worked really hard in the community of Eugene to nurture that. And so I'm wondering if you want to comment on what's changed, what's made that possible where it may not have been possible 10 or 15 years ago when you first got into this business.
Well, I think first and foremost, it's just the growth and sort of the globalization of football that's finally, hit our shores as a viable sport in this country. And it's you see in the MLS, we have an extremely viable league. It's a healthy league, and working all the way down through the USL and the NASL and obviously down to the PDL, we have a surplus of players in this country, and they want to play, and they want to develop, and they want to continue to chase the dream of playing at their highest level, and the PDL certainly facilitates that opportunity. We're very much a minor league sports franchise, and I think we've positioned ourselves in a great market in Eugene Springfield communities, where you've got a mix of very, I'd say, affluent, youth soccer players. You've got a Latino population that really focuses on soccer, and you've got two communities that have embraced us and really given us hope, if you will, to be able to be viable for years to come. And we're not going to make a ton of money in this business, there's no doubt about that, but I think what we've done is we've brought a high level of soccer into this community. And we've had 800 fans, close to 1,000 fans at our opening night against the Seattle Sounders U23s. We've had 3 home games, we've had 3 great turnouts, and I think people were just hungry for this as fans to come watch high-level soccer in this community. But also, you've had players. I mean, I've been able to recruit players from Spain, from England, from Germany, from all over the world that recognize the United States as a viable place to come and play, where it's a great opportunity for them, and that goes back 15, 20 years of planting the seeds of soccer in this country, and people like myself, my brother, that have really tried to establish something. But it's amazing to see. It really is. Ken, I've known you for a long time, and I don't think 15, 20 years ago I would have said, hey, I'm going to come back to Eugene and launch a minor league sports franchise in this community. And I think it's a testament to the growth and globalization of the game. The sports industry itself has been the real push for us, and we're going for it.
And John, can you give us a little insights of where you turn to for ideas in terms of modeling the way you would structure the club and why you've made some of those decisions? I think our group really is intrigued by structure as well as the outcome.
Well, I'd be a fool not to thank the Timbers and the Sounders and the Whitecaps. I mean, you look at the football in the Northwest right now, and it's just thriving, and the fan culture, and that really drives our business. If we don't have fans in the stands, we don't have a model and a business that we can rely on for revenue stream. So you look at what the Timbers are doing, you look at what the Whitecaps are doing, and the Sounders, and their fan interaction, and the passion and the sort of tribal following that those three franchises have. I mean, we look to them and said, look, all we need is a little bit of that to operate in our small market, and I think we'll be fine. So we have paid very close attention to some of their marketing campaigns, their ticket sales, their price points for that, sponsorship, and basically took it down 2 or 3 levels and sort of ran with that. And we've been very successful with our sponsors. We have some great revenue coming in from sponsors, from the Slocum Center, for our title sponsor, Oakshire Brewery, which is a local microbrew, from Tellero Golf Course and Bend, from Tensegrity PT, I mean, TNT Rafting, you name it. I mean, Two Town Cider House in Corvallis. We're getting people outside of our market that want to be a part of this, which is phenomenal. And that's exactly what the Timbers have done, the Sounders have done, the Whitecaps have done, and we're just trying to follow a little bit in those footsteps.
Yeah, one of the things that occurs to me from when we, when we first really started talking about this, and this has sort of been an ongoing conversation for 16 better part of 17 years now, is that American soccer fans always were willing to watch the big event, but they weren't willing to watch the small event. And my thought was always that part of that issue was that they simply weren't educated enough to understand the game on a nuanced level. And you feel like that's true, and do you that in a sense that that's changing now, where there's a level of conversation about the sport that there just didn't we first started doing this in 1997?
Yeah, I think it's changed drastically because of the amount of games that are on TV now. And our fan bases are becoming more and more educated and much more knowledgeable, not only about the team they follow, but the league they follow, and that's huge for us. I mean, you look at the amount of football that's on TV every weekend from Premier League, and the job that NBC Sports has done to really take the British Premier League up a level in terms of the broadcast content is absolutely phenomenal. And you look at now what's going on with the MLS and their TV broadcasting rights, and now even down into the NWSL and the Women's Pro League, ESPN and Fox, I believe, have just picked up a ton of games as they close their league this summer. So soccer is much more available for the common fan, and that common fan has become much more educated and knows about Liverpool, knows about Man U, knows about Barcelona, knows about Bayern Munich, and we're seeing that in daily conversation with fans and people we talk to about our club. And you can have a really educated conversation about the game now at a coffee house in Eugene about soccer, and that's great. And that wasn't around 20 years ago when they had maybe 2 games on TV a weekend, and you had to really search for your education. And now it's absolutely amazing.
And John, obviously things are trending in the right direction. What barriers do you see that remain in order to really establish that foothold in American culture for soccer? So thinking more globally here rather than just in Eugene, but beyond that.
Well, I mean, I guess I'll talk about the MLS, specifically, because that's the highest level we have in this country besides our national team. But I think you're still seeing a little bit of the player with maybe a year or two left in their career in Europe still popping up over here and playing, which is good and bad, in my opinion. I think it's great from a marketing standpoint, and the Beckham project certainly, paid dividends because he still had legs and he could still play, and he was a cultural icon in football, and we all understood that. But you're also seeing the Thierry Henry's play. You're seeing, Cahill, who came from Everton, who's a fixture for the Red Bull. You're seeing, David Villa potentially, coming over to NYFC now. Frank Lampard's possibly coming over. So you're still seeing a little bit of that, where players on their last legs are maybe cashing in on the MLS a little bit, which I'm in favor of from an exposure standpoint for the league and growing the brand itself in that regard. But I'm concerned that those players that have 2-3 years left maybe are coming over and challenging for spots and taking spots from maybe Americans that we could be developing. And that, for me, as a coach and as a, business person in this industry, I struggle with that a little bit in terms of balancing the marketing and the business and the growth of our top tier soccer in this country versus what are we doing at home to create the Lampards and the David Villas and the Beckhams, and that's a challenge because Beckham certainly put us on the map in terms of a league, and now it's potentially becoming saturated with those marquee names that they're capitalizing on the last 2 years of their career in our league, and that's a challenge.
And this brings up a really important question, which is, you mentioned it might be much better if we could have American players who were the stars, and preferably if they were in their prime. But the fact is, for all the increased interest in soccer, it is not necessarily translated into the ability to produce more or any, debatably, international quality players. But I'll define my term: players who could play for clubs that have a chance. They would play in the biggest leagues in Europe, could win the biggest leagues in Europe. And so, in your view, where is the disconnect there? Why is the growing interest in soccer not through almost osmosis, spawned a whole generation of world-class players?
Well, that's a really loaded question, and I don't know how much time we have, but I think a lot of it comes from the fact that our soccer development culture was created on a pay-to-play system, and youth players predominantly that could afford to play soccer in an organized manner, with the right coaches, so to speak, with the right equipment, with the right setup, had to pay, and they had to pay a premium to be put in that environment. Where you look at the rest of the world, Brazil produces the top players in the world year in and year out, and they don't really play organized soccer in an organized club until they're 14, 15 years old. Most all the clubs in Europe have a hierarchy from U8s all the way up to the first team, from the professional ranks. We don't have that. It's slowly coming. It's slowly coming where you have MLS clubs that have U8, U9, U10 programs all the way up to the first team. But I think that's been the biggest indictment on our ability to develop players, is we just haven't had the infrastructure. Because to some degree it was working to develop players that were suitable to play Division I college soccer, and they were content with that. And that's been the model we've had for years. And as long as the MLS continues to hold a draft and to have players come through the college ranks, which is good and bad, I think ultimately it stunts a little bit of player development. And it's been a real challenge.
Hey, John, you touched on a really interesting point about the idea of it being organized soccer, the pay-for-play model. And then in Brazil, and contrasting how that's much more of a pickup style. Anyways, because there's been a lot of literature in recent years here about the value of pickup style sports and the old sandlot. Any way or any thought given to how that might be replicated, but still alleviate some of the safety concerns or other things that maybe have been prohibitive in the past?
Well, there are some organizations that are really putting a lot of emphasis on like futsal and just drop-in pickup futsal. So it is somewhat structured. There's obviously futsal courts or fields, if you will, and it's sort of drop-in. and play. So there is some structure, but that allows you to express yourself as a player, not on the confines of a proper training session, and develop some skill and some confidence perhaps. And I know U.S. Soccer has done a lot in terms of their curriculum of trying to implement like street soccer, where in a structured environment you mix the teams up quite a bit, so players play with different players, and you change the conditions of the game, and you make it more of a pickup style soccer to alleviate some of the the organized structure, but that still was falling under a pay-to-play model, if you will. I think the biggest thing we need to really look at is integrating our inner cities and our lower income families into participation in soccer. And if you look at some of the best countries in soccer historically that have produced some of the best players, and a lot of these young men and young women come out of lower income families, and they come out of areas where maybe soccer is a means to an escape for them, very much perhaps like basketball is and football is for our American sports. And we don't have that. We haven't had that because it's been pay to play for a long time. And there's so many players that have come through our system, up through our youth national teams, that don't make it to senior level football because of one reason or another. And that begs the question, what are we doing wrong to promote and get these players through our systems consistently? And I think a lot of it has to come down to the model that we're subscribed to right now.
Yeah, so let's walk through this. If you're a parent and you can afford it, what does a coach make say to give private lessons, and what is the league make for those private lessons? What is the cost of being in a league, and to what extent do these leagues make an effort to find a talented Latino kid, for example?
Well, I mean, one other major concern we have in this country is that, before I try to answer that question, Ken, is that our country is so big, and you're not going to find every player, and there's not going to be one system, I don't think, that's going to fit California. It would be the same that's going to work in Oregon, But that said, I think we have to do a better job of getting corporate America involved in supporting and sponsoring youth soccer for a lot of different reasons. One's to promote health and wellness and a certain lifestyle, and what young men and women are going to learn by participating in sports. And if they don't have that opportunity, then I think we're all going to suffer in the long run in terms of our overall health as a nation, our overall well-being. And I would love nothing more than to have corporate America step up and support programs and projects that get people playing soccer. But I also think we need to make sure that when young players and perhaps low-income families are identified, that talent is nurtured, and that talent isn't just cast aside because they can't afford to pay to play. And it is changing, but it's taken a long time. Now, I don't have numbers, Ken, in terms of what families pay, but I know it's upwards of sometimes $10,000, $12,000, $13,000, $14,000 a year to pay, and that includes travel, coaching fees, uniforms, you name it. Tournaments, if they succeed at certain tournaments, they advance to regionals, they win regionals, they go to nationals. I mean, it could be a $15,000 a year, pay stub, and that's for one kid. So you have multiple kids paying or trying to play soccer and pay. I mean, you're looking at potentially $23,000, $30,000 for them to come through that system, and it's disturbing.
It strikes me as a lot of times you'll hear the driver behind it is to get a college scholarship, and a 529 plan, if you put that same money in, would probably get you a much better funding source for college at that point.
Yes. Right now my kids are slated to go to junior college for sure. It's amazing. It really is. And that's been the driving factor from a lot of youth clubs is, get the scholarship. You're good enough, we can find you a scholarship. And a scholarship is, in soccer, it can be divided into those four components. You can get academic, you can get athletic, you can get, a mixture. It's not a full ride, and I think we need to do a better job of educating our parents too in terms of what that scholarship consists of. It's not football, it's not basketball, it's not you're not getting a full ride. And men's college soccer, I believe, has 9.9 scholarships for a whole team, and women has 14 at this point. So, you know, it's a difficult number to, you know, to look at and go, hey, not everybody's going to get a scholarship. That's the bottom line. But I think that has driven our youth development for so many years, you know, that quest and that goal. But I know not only the athlete, but the parent to get them a college scholarship.
Right. It's interesting to me, you know, I'll throw this out to both of you because I'd be interested in hearing your response about this too, Josh. I wonder sometimes if you were to go back to what it was from 1948 to 56, where scholarships were only given on the basis of financial need, whether you wouldn't solve a host of problems at the same time, because all of a sudden I think parents would recalculate the investment in youth sports, whether it was really worthwhile. Because if you were in a family that could afford to pay $12,000 a year, you know, discretionary money, so your kid plays on a soccer team or a hockey team or what have you, you probably aren't going to qualify for financial, you know, significant financial aid at a state
Right.
school. And so all of a sudden, you might go back to having sports be more local again, right? And there'd be less money in the system, but it may actually be better for participation rates and for having more perspective on the activity while it was being played. And it might, you know, it might have this really nice sort of knock-on effect throughout the whole process.
Josh?
Yeah. You know, I guess the thing that was occurring, this might be a little peripheral, Ken, but what I was thinking about the whole time listening to John was the idea of the contrasting of basketball versus soccer in the U.S. and how often you see in the smallest nook of any, you know, inner city, you see a hoop, or even, and then you go rural and you see on a farm a makeshift basket there's not even a place to dribble the ball, but it's on the side of a barn and the rim's all bent, but people are still using these and playing on it. And when you look abroad, you see that equivalent for soccer pitches. But
Right.
You don't see that in the U.S. And I kept wondering, and I'd love to get your insight, John. Is that the answer? I mean, do you just need to promote ways to find spaces and people, is they feel the dreams approach, you build them and people will come, or is there more to it than that to get people engaged in the sport?
Well, I think that's a huge part of it, and giving them an opportunity, you know, to go out and play, but also educating them on the system and how to maybe beat it in a way, and at least get in the system so they have a chance. Because, you know, I was fortunate enough to work at Real Salt Lake in their youth academy for about 1.5 years, and it was, at the time, it was the only full residential, you know, soccer academy that was linked with an MLS club, and it was absolutely groundbreaking in terms of player development and sort of, you know, taking the current U.S. soccer model and putting it on its head and saying we're going to actually invest in, you know, a turnkey operation in terms of providing education for players, a roof over their head, and basically soccer 24/7, and put them in a system where they can succeed. And that program has produced not only Division I college athletes, but professionals as well. And the neat thing about that was that a lot of these young players that came into that system had no idea about NCAA Division I soccer. They didn't understand about the potential opportunity for them to get an education through football, which was huge. And that was, for me, that was really, really rewarding to see some of these young men come from, you know, Phoenix, from El Paso, from Las Cruces, New Mexico, and actually now maybe first generation, you know, student athletes that are going to get an education. And that was fantastic. And I think that's a great story from an education standpoint and a college standpoint. Now, from a soccer development standpoint, these kids had a 40,000 square foot gym facility that they could play indoor 24/7. They could lift weights. They could watch film. They could do everything they wanted to do to just consume themselves with football and their own education and their own development when we weren't looking as coaches. And we certainly didn't have the best players, you know, in the country, but the U16s ended up winning a national championship last year, and I think that program has placed 5 professionals with Real Salt Lake. And a lot more MLS clubs now are following that model, like FC Dallas. I believe Philadelphia Union have put in a soccer school, a soccer-specific school where about 15 kids live together in a home and go to school. and play soccer together. So it is changing, but it's a lot of money. It's a lot of an infrastructure. But their goal is to produce young professional players, which is great. I'm in the same business. I understand it. But we need to see more of that, where there are resources now to go pluck a kid out of say Phoenix and say, hey, this is a path that you could follow and actually get an education and potentially go, play professional soccer. So we need more of that. I would love to see goals on the side of the freeway everywhere. I think that would just naturally change the culture of the game in this country, and it would be great.
And John, we've talked structurally a lot about some of these challenges in the sport and how we grow it. What about within the sport itself? Ken's often raised the issue of how different it is whether you're coaching men or women in soccer. But what are some of the challenges within the sport that are interesting to think about and analyze as well?
Well, just from maybe a gender standpoint, there's the old saying that men need to play well to feel well, and then the flip side is the women need to feel really well to play well. And I think just speaking from maybe locker room culture, I think the part I really enjoyed about coaching on the women's side is the real camaraderie and the real sense of team that you get. And I think it was easier to manage sometimes the locker room in terms of dealing with players that might be a little disappointed that they didn't play. Where on the men's side, I think there's a lot of I'm better than him, and what's coach's problem? I should be playing over him, and you get a little bit more tension and friction in the locker room. So I think the team cohesion on the women's side, I think it can happen a little bit more organically and naturally, which I really enjoyed being a part of. And then again, on the men's side, it takes a little bit for men sometimes to open up to each other and trust each other. And that's a big component of, I think, being successful and having a good team is knowing that you trust each other as teammates and you're going to work for each other. And again, I think that happened a little bit more organically on the women's side. Do I have a preference? No, I don't, because at the end of the day, my job as a coach was always try to put out the best product possible and create a safe, fun, and enjoyable environment where players could enjoy themselves. And I've enjoyed both.
So 20 years ago, the women's national team was way ahead of the rest of the world. And now, or at least most of the rest of the world, they were undoubtedly year in, year out number one, and then they might get competition from Norway or China or what have you. But now they seem to have fallen, they seem to be falling behind or struggling to stay even at least. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think the rest of the world actually put some resources behind player development and went after a model that youth clubs were integrated into professional clubs, and that helped. And they put a lot more resources into the women's game in England, and Sweden, and Denmark, and Norway, and Japan, France, Brazil, and Brazil is just a freak nation of footballers, regardless of resources. They produce footballers no matter what, but they actually, the rest of the world said, well, wait a minute, we're getting beat handily, we're not as athletic as what can we do to try to catch up and reduce that gap? And they basically invested a ton of money into player development and building a hierarchy within their respective clubs and leagues. And that's why you see, some of our top American players, like Tobin Heath playing in Paris. You see some very young. There's a young American player out of Colorado, blanking on her name, but she was slated to go to the University of North Carolina and play Division I soccer, and Paris Saint-Germain offered her a very, very nice, lucrative contract, and at 18 she signed a professional contract. And those are the type of resources that are being put into clubs in Europe right now that have reduced that gap. And I've been out of the women's game in terms of the youth development side for a while here, but I know that we are doing some wonderful things to continue the history and the legacy of our women's programs, certainly all the way up to the national team level. But again, I think, you know, Europe is just kind of, you know, said, hey, wait a minute, we have to try to catch up here, and they have.
John, really fascinating in terms of hearing more about the growth of what's been going on in soccer. Any final thoughts for us about what is next for the sport, and also for ways to get engaged even locally with your program, and hearing some of that too?
Well, selfishly, I think one of the best ways to get engaged is to support, your grassroots, local soccer, because I think that's really where U.S. soccer has come from. This used to be a massive melting pot, and you look at back on the East Coast, some of the team names that played in the old U.S. Open Cup and that had successful, like the Brooklyn Italians, and Ken can talk for days about the Fort Lauderdale Strikers and the Tampa Bay Rowdies, and I certainly have a ton of respect for anybody and everybody who played in those leagues and laid a foundation for myself to be able to coach, professionally here in this country and do what I do. And I think it comes down to fans continuing to educate themselves and watch the beautiful game and support grassroots soccer, and certainly for those that are listening and that are local or in the area that want to come out to watch, Lane United. Our website's laneunitedfc.com, and there's tickets online and merch and anything about our program, and love to chat about the game. And I just think it's we're still scratching the surface here. I think you're going to see in the next 20 years a continued boom and growth of the sport, and I hope it goes in the right direction. I really do, but. For me, again, selfishly and personally, it takes people in our communities to support, what we're doing for us to be successful and continue to give back to our community and be successful. And we want to take that traveling roadshow with us to where we play in the Northwest and let people know that soccer's here to stay, and we have passionate fans, we have passionate owners, and we hope that that's contagious, and that'll go to Seattle even more at the lower levels, and smaller markets in this country that could really benefit from creating, a PDL franchise.
Well, John, thank you so much for being a guest today, and thank you for all the work you're doing locally and nationally, and really we look forward to seeing the growth of what's
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it, and it doesn't feel like work because it's passion, and I love it, and I hope we're doing our part to give back to the game and excite people to come watch soccer and ultimately play the game, because that's why we do it. So thank you very much for having me.
Well, we'll see you out there, because I'll be sure to catch a game soon, and Ken will be asking me for a ride, no doubt.
Let me know if you need a ticket.
Thanks.